How is everybody doing? And welcome back for another Strength Chat episode. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest for you all. Today, I am joined by the founder of Kilo Education. Today, I am joined by the one and only Stephane Cazeault. How are you doing?
Very good, man. I'm really happy to be here and talking training and periodization with you. So that's pretty exciting, man.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on. I suppose the first question though is, how are you? What's kind of been happening in your world recently, Stefan?
I mean, I'm doing good. We were pretty busy. The start of the year for us, it's always a busy time. As the holiday period, it's always a little bit more of a down period. So 2026, January, we're kickstarting the year. We have a few new projects coming up our way. We're going to teach a private seminar in a gym in Chicago in 2 weeks. We have plans to go to the Czech Republic. The dates, there's nothing confirmed there, but that's one of the plans we have to Prague. And then we're teaching a seminar for baseball strength coaches in the Dominican Republic at the Milwaukee Brewers practice facility there in Santo Domingo. So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, cool. And how do you find kind of, because you've mentioned a couple of countries there, how do you find kind of the traveling and the in-person seminars as well as kind of sticking to your own work routine as well? How do you kind of find balance in that?
Uh, I mean, to be honest, I'm used to it. I've been doing this for 10 years under Kilo. And then prior to Kilo, when I worked for Charles Poliquin, we were kind of in the same scenario. So for me, it's been kind of my routine, if you want, since 2012. So juggling travel, teaching with the online coaching and course development and on and on. It's something I'm used to. It's something I enjoy. I mean, the thing I really do enjoy the most is the teaching in front of a classroom, like those seminars where we have 20 plus students in class. That to me is really what I thrive on and what I really
Yeah,
enjoy
cool.
doing.
And I suppose as well, you mentioned they're doing it since 2012. That is kind of, I suppose that is kind of your routine, traveling, balancing work and doing all those things. And you've mentioned there, been doing this for the last 10 years, previous work before that. But for everyone listening who might not know your background in training, education, kind of the getting to the point where you're at now. Just want to give a little bit of a background to yourself.
Yeah, so I mean, I grew up in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, so the French part of Canada. Went to university there, and I started training myself when I was 11. So I was always into strength training, and from the age of 14, I knew that I wanted to be a strength coach. And my favorite sport was American football. So when I went to university and studied exercise science, my ultimate goal was to one day train NFL players. So when I graduated from university in 2000, I started doing a lot of continuing education while I was working at a gym, at a commercial gym at the time. And I started doing a bunch of courses like Ian King, Charlie Francis, John Berardi at the time, Eric Serrano. And then Charles Poliquin was one that I really connected with. He's French Canadian as well, so I guess there was some type of association here. And in 2004, while I was doing my second or third course with Charles Poliquin, I was asked after the class if I'd ever be interested in moving to the United States to work with athletes. So of course I said yes. And then in 2005, they reached out and I moved to the US and I started training. It started with NHL hockey players in St. Louis, Missouri. And then that evolved to NFL, evolved to baseball. And in 2010, 2011, 2012, I was hired as a high performance consultant for the St. Louis Cardinal, which is the baseball team there. So I was kind of involved with training the main players, training writing programs for the farm teams. Plus, I had a dozen private clients from the team that I was training one-on-one. So I was kind of involved in 2011 when they won the World Series, which was a really really cool experience.
Yeah.
And then in 2012, I was asked by Charles to go work for him in Rhode Island for his education company that was Pollock and Group. And 2016, it evolved where I decided to start my own company, Kilo Strength Society. We started in Huntington Beach in California, which was supposed to be just group training. And as we were building our clientele for group training, I kept being asked to do education. So I'm like, well, I might as well do education while we're building our clientele. And the education evolved to the point where in 2021, we decided to concentrate only on education. So we moved to the Miami, Florida area and we started education. And now that's what we do like full time.
Yeah. Ah, nice, cool. Quite a broad mix there of working with different people and the education side of things. And do you find that the education side of things, especially from when you mentioned at the start there, wanting to be a strength coach, that maybe the education side of things was at some point always going to be on the cards for you, or was it a case of just kind of it just happening naturally?
Just happened naturally. Like honestly, it was never really a thing because even when I was hired by Charles Poliquin, which it was a education company, my task, I was more a behind the scenes guy. I was like the guy behind the scenes, supervising the education system, dealing with the ownership and all of the intricacies of the business. So I was not in, I taught a few courses, but it was not my main task when I was working for Charles Poliquin. And like I said, when we started Kilo Strength Society, my goal was just to own a group training facility where we were basically doing the training system that I had developed over the years when I was in St. Louis, Missouri with my clients. It was not even a thing. So it kind of happened when I was asked, and then I realized that I really, really enjoyed it. But it's kind of interesting because both of my parents are actually teachers themselves. So I guess
Oh,
I
no way.
have this, must be a genetic factor somehow, but like it was never a plan of mine at all. It just
Yeah.
happened.
I think it's cool though that when something happens like that and which isn't maybe part of the plan, and you end up falling into something that you enjoy, that you enjoy doing, which I think is really cool. One thing that you said there, and kind of we touched on it right at the start, in terms of the topic of this podcast and this episode, and you mentioned there about wanting to have a group training facility with the system and the programming that you'd put together. And this is one thing that I speak with coaches and clients quite a lot about. And it's kind of that principle of periodization. And sometimes people and coaches will think, right, okay, so it's going to be an 8-week program, 12-week program, but I kind of want to dive into, your thoughts, philosophies around what periodization is, and, how do we go kind of beyond that initial program so that it's kind of repeatable success, and progression within their training, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, periodization, to me at least, is, I mean, you have the word in the name, so it's about training periods. So understanding that in strength training, you have like different strength qualities that you need to train. So when you understand that you have different strength qualities to focus on, you'll also realize at one point that if you only train one quality, you'll get to a point of diminishing return. You can't always train, let's say, hypertrophy at like a given intensity and volume range and expect that you'll have like high hypertrophy outcomes forever. Eventually, you're going to plateau. There's going to be monotony. There's going to be stallness. So then you kind of need to switch the focus of your training to kind of kickstart some new growth or create a new stimulus to keep on growing. And when I say growing, I'm saying in the process of strength training in general. So then you need to switch training focus towards a different training period to now access a different strength quality to develop so that you can further enhance your development. So in essence, periodization is the sequencing of different training periods over time to leverage the outcome that you're trying to get from your training. And then so like because originally like the first remnants of organized periodization was in the early 1900s coming out of Russia, but it was very they called it standard period. Well, they didn't call it that then, but now they call it standard periodization, where it was basically, let's say, 3 by 10 forever, right? So you were always doing the same thing. There was nothing would change. And then they realized, the Russian mostly, that if you went through dedicated periods of training, you can actually leverage and improve performance to a much greater extent. So then in the late 50s, early 60s, you had Matveyev from Russia that basically was studying the training from many coaches. And he wrote one of the first ever published manuscript on periodization, which was basically a summary of what the Russian coaches were doing at the time. And, you know, obviously in any periodization models, there's a lot of loading and volume fluctuations. So it's never truly linear, but Matveyev's model was kind of like the 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 birth of the linear model, if you want.
Yeah.
So that's where it comes from. Although linear model actually don't truly exist, but as we understand it, what it means is you go from phases of lower intensity and higher volume to create a base. And then over time, you slowly progress in intensity and you decrease volume so you can express more of that intensity. So that's a linear model in that sense. And that was one of the first. And then it evolved to you had Isserin with block periodization. You had Stone with sequential periodization. You had Schmidt-Bleicher with undulating periodization, where now Charles Pollock and Dietmar Schmidt-Bleicher from Germany was his greatest mentor. So when Pollock came back from Germany, he actually wrote the first ever English published piece of literature in 1988 on undulating periodization. So a lot of people associate undulating periodization to Charles Poliquin, but in actuality, it actually stems from Schmidt-Bleicher. And then, you know, like you've had like conjugate models, you have like a bunch of different models that evolved over time. Daily undulating periodization, where Bill Kramer in 1991 kind of devised a study on it and stuff like that. So there's so many models nowadays. But basically, periodization is how do you organize training interventions over time and manipulate volume and intensity to manage fatigue so you can peak performances. And the problem, and I'm sorry, I'm getting a little deep here, but the problem with periodization for me as a student in my early to mid 20s after university is whenever you look at periodization literature, and one of the most known periodization authors is Tudor Bumpa, it's always sports related. So when I started in 1999 as a personal trainer in a commercial gym, I'm training general population year round. They're not competing. There's no competitive period. There's no one event I need to peak for, but they're training all the time. So I still needed to find a way to manage fatigue. So I'm like, okay, well, periodization is also useful for the Gen Pup, but there's nothing really out there that explains how you would periodize outside of the context of sports performance. So even to this day, if you open any book or if you go on human kinetics and search any book on periodization, you will always have that sports bias to it, which gets tricky for the personal trainer dealing with Gen Pup. So me, as a 20 something year old kid, training mostly Gen Pup at the time before I moved to the United States, I'm like, well, I need to figure a way to optimize periodization for that clientele. And basically, Kilo Strength Society, our entire coaching curriculum, yes, we have a sports performance section, but the majority of our curriculum is how to apply periodization in the context of Gen Pop that trains year round. And that to me was a very important thing because most people in the fitness personal training industry, they don't really use periodization. It's not really a thing.
Yeah, and that's kind of especially from what you were speaking there, that I know from myself being at university, it is all related to sport, and whereas and especially for a lot of the listeners, whether it be coaches or gym goers or lifters, the majority is going to be general population, and all the different models that you've mentioned there. Do you think that's where common mistakes that you see from coaches, from trainers, is kind of the understanding of periodization from different models, and it's kind of confusing for them? And then what's kind of the strategies that you followed to have that periodization with general population clients, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a little caveat to this discussion. Like, first of all, it's important to understand the premise of periodization. And like I said earlier, the reason why you would even care about periodization is in the context of fatigue management over time. So if you're training people year round and they're training all the time, you need to figure a way to manage fatigue. But the problem is a lot of personal trainers train clients twice a week. So in the context of you as a personal trainer, you're training clients once or twice a week, then I would say that periodization is absolutely useless, to be quite honest. There's no need for it because there's no such thing as fatigue management because there's no fatigue accumulation. But I was fortunate when I was studying at university and I got my first job in a commercial gym. I actually got a job in the most expensive commercial gym in Montreal, where the price point was really, really high. There was a lot of the clientele was pretty well off. So the majority of my clients were training with me 4 times per week. Like some was 3 times, but the majority was 4 times per week. So at 4 times per week year round, then you needed to find, especially when they have a hectic work week and they have children, you needed to find ways now to help them manage fatigue. So with that clientele, periodization became something very, very relevant. And this is how it started for me. So I just want to be clear that if you're training people once or twice a week, there's nothing to really manage. But 3 to 4 times a week, then you kind of need to start considering it. But then there's models that are not necessarily relevant or they're too complex for that type of clientele. So in my opinion, there's only really like three overarching models that would make sense for the Gen Pop that trains year round. You have the classic linear model, which will be great for your novice clientele, where their training age is quite low. Their actual strength level and nervous system efficiency is quite low as well. This would be the most effective way to periodize. Then you have basically what's Kilo's standard periodization model, which is undulating periodization, which is it's a hybrid between a sequential model and an emphasis model, but because we tend to do phase undulating, you can classify it a little bit more as a sequential model. And then finally, one model that I really, really like, and to be quite honest, it's more one of my model. There, like you're not going to find much in the literature on this, and it's wave periodization. I know that Dan Baker and Mike Stone and Charles Poliquin referred this sometimes, but there's nothing really clear about this. But wave periodization is basically a hybrid between linear and phase undulating, where you have the smoother rise and intensity that you see with linear periodization, but you have more wave-like volume and intensity fluctuations over time, like you would see with phase undulating periodization. So it's kind of like this little hybrid, and I find it works really well with the intermediate and advanced or certain psychological traits, like people who like consistency, people who don't like abrupt, massive changes that occur all the time. If you're dealing with these people, like I'm one of those, the wave model fits me very well. But I have other clients like Porik, which you did a webinar with,
Yeah.
podcast with. He prefers the undulating model because he prefers the more consistent fluctuations in load, um, as he tends to adapt a little quicker to the stimulus. So there, to me, there's the physiological component that you need to address, but you always need to consider the psychology of the client you're training to make sure that the model fits the person as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes an interesting point because you mentioned there about, the fatigue management side of things and the personal trainers, whether they're training twice a week. Do you think that, especially with, group training now, is maybe a little bit more commonplace in gyms? A lot of facilities are doing that. A lot of facilities are doing that, as opposed to, back in the day where it was mainly just like one-to-one clients. Do you think the periodization and the different models plays a bigger part in group training because you're going to have more touch points with the members? And then the second part is, when you've said there about the three models that you've mentioned, and it works kind of more for intermediate, do you think you can actually progress through different periodization models as the client, as the lifter progresses?
Yeah, so I'll answer the second part first, and I'll go with the first. So yes, you can definitely vary the model over time with the client as they evolve in strength, as they evolve in neural efficiency, and as they evolve as a person in the world of training. So there's definitely a place in time where you can manipulate all three core models. But then to come back to the first question, the, there's a few problems with group training. So the vast majority of group training facility, the problem is they're not really training. They're working out, but they're not really training. A lot of these group training model, like F45 in Australia and stuff like an Orange Theory Fitness in the US, the problem is there is no true structure. They change the workout routinely. So a client might show up one day, they're doing something, they show up the next day, it's something else, and there's no recurring element to the training. So because there's no recurring component, there's no training effect. You can only the the response from trainings comes from repeating a stimulus over and over and over until you plateau. So if it changes all the time, there's nothing that you need to adapt from. You're just trying to survive the stress of that workout. So in essence, that these approaches for group training are not periodized whatsoever. And the then it kind of depends how you're running your gym. So if you're running, so let's say you have a small studio gym and you're running small group training, and you have very dedicated starting point where the customer needs to register for this group by March 1st, let's say. Well, then if it's 20 people coming in March 1st and it's the same group training with you for a dedicated block of time, then you can periodize. But if you're doing a model like we were doing in California, where anytime, at any point in time during the year, we could have a new member coming in and joining a group where you had people that have been training with us for 2 years. Well, how can we periodize? It's impossible because we have one person that's been training for 2 years with our system and another person that's brand new. How can they both be in the exact same phase? So you can't really. So the way we did it at Kilo at that point was a built-in periodization, but that revolve really just only around the volume and intensity. So the way it worked is the training sessions, like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we had one upper body session running and one lower body session running. And then Thursday, Friday, Saturday, we had a different upper body session running and a different lower body session running. So at any point in time, the client could come in and choose to either do upper or lower. And then if they would come in the second half of the week, it would be a different upper, a different lower. So ideally, when we had members buying the all-inclusive membership, they would actually come 4 times. They would come to upper one, upper two, lower two. But the difference is, although the workout was the same for everyone, our A series, which is the primary exercise, that big multi-joint compound lift, where we were spending about 25 minutes to 30 minutes of our session doing, this is where now we would give a very specific rep scheme to the client. So the A series, which is what actually counts, would be periodized. But as they moved to the B and C series, which was the assistance and remedial work, then everybody was doing the same, because at this point in time, it doesn't really matter, because the nature of assistance work is a little bit more hypertrophy in nature, and it's to support a primary lift. And the nature of the remedial work is more prehab, rehab, or targeted small muscular structure that could be limiting components of the main lift. So, for example, we could have a client that been training for us for 2 years, and their A series, which was, let's say, overhead press and chin up, for that 25-minute period, they were doing, let's say, 6x4.
Yeah.
But then the new members coming in, he's still doing overhead and chin up. But that new member, we tell him within that 25-minute period, just do sets of 10,
Yeah.
right? So they add higher reps, lower intensity, more total rep volume. So they built a base of work capacity. They built intermuscular coordination, but everybody was doing the same workout in terms of exercise selection and structure. But the rep scheme of the A series changed, which allowed us in an actual group scenario to have some form of periodization. And then every 6 weeks, the training structure would change. And then we would simply tell the client, okay, now you were doing 6x4. Now you're going to switch to a different rep scheme. And then we could play around. We could have the newbie client doing more of a linear approach, and the person that had been training for 2, 3 years do more of an undulating approach. And that was very easy to monitor, because each and every one client was in charge of tracking their own load.
Yeah.
All of their programs was in app, and they would enter their weights and reps, and that was recorded in their library, so they would always know where to move
Yeah.
for the next phase and on. So that's how we did it. So it was not pure periodization as you would in a one-on-one scenario, but it's as close to true periodization that we could do in a group setting where we had new members coming in at any point in time.
Yeah, and going back to what we said about kind of the systems, because you've said there how you can have some form of periodization. You have the systems in place from there, rather than new people coming in, people starting at different phrases. This might be a little bit of a tangent, but from kind of gym owners, head coaches out there that are in charge of that programming from there, do you think sometimes that's an obstacle or a challenge that they struggle with, and that's when they end up having too much variety or flexibility to be able to monitor progress and allow them to allow the members to get stronger and develop that skill of lifting and getting stronger over a period of time?
I mean, listen, for us, it was never an issue, because no matter what, our any 1 hour window was maxed out at 24 people. We could never have more than 12 people doing upper and 12 people doing lower at any time, at any 1 hour period. So, and we were able to supervise that many people with just one coach. But the reason why we're able to do so is because one, each client was in charge of tracking their own thing. And two, you realize after a while that once the gym has been running for a decent amount of time, at any given hour, it's not like these 24 people are all newbies. So yeah, you might have 24-hour people in that hour, but 19 of them have been training forever. So you don't really, they kind of know what's going on.
Yeah.
And then you can focus on the 5 people that are relatively new. And then you put a little bit more time and effort on trying to teach them the ropes of the load manipulation over time. But everything was fixed for 6 weeks. So it was not, so we would tell the new client, okay, you're doing 4 by 10 for the next 6 weeks. Then the exercise complex changes. And now all we would say is, okay, now you're going to do 5 by 8, linear approach. So it was very, very, very simple to monitor because now what would happen is the coach would spend most of the time actually coaching clients instead of monitoring training and counting reps. Like if the coach saw that somebody was struggling on front squat, well, he would go and coach the person on front squat. Like we didn't need to take care of everybody's like rep counting and blah blah blah. Like, and in the app on top of it, we had the video associated to the workout. So if they needed a refresher and the coach was busy coaching someone, they just have to look at the video. And if they have experience, they're like, oh yeah, 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 I remember this movement. Then they would go and do it.
Yeah.
So like for us, it was a pretty smooth scenario.
Yeah, I think with that, the key thing that you said there was the coaches can actually concentrate on coaching. I think sometimes when people think about systems that the coach has to do everything, whereas members are more than capable of tracking their own load as long as they know what the program is, and then they can focus on the coaches can focus on correcting their front squat or working anything from there. One thing that I wanted to touch on, and this is especially speaking to other coaches that I've worked with and helped in their development. You said there kind of the progression or the complexity of the movement would then move on in 6 weeks, and this is something that I think younger coaches maybe think about is like how do you decide the time frames? Because especially for myself from other powerlifting programs. It can be a case of, okay, we're going to keep this running. Things are going really, really well. We're just going to keep that momentum going. How do you or what's your thought processes on the length of phases? Do you let them carry on a little bit? Is there a point where, all right, we need to speed things up a little bit and they can progress a little bit faster in terms of skill development or the complexity of the movement? What's kind of your take on deciding those phases, letting them last longer or changing things around?
Well, my take would depend if we're talking about the group training scenario or one-on-one coaching. But in the group training scenario for us, what we did to simplify it is we used a integrated microcycle, which means that our microcycle length was 14 days. And we in our group training was called primate because we basically use 8 primary movements. And what would happen is on week 1, upper body 1 would be overhead. Then we had a squat session, which was called squat 1. Then the next upper body was a bench press session. Then we had a front squat session. Then what would happen is the week after, upper body 1, instead of being overhead, would be incline press. So a similar motor pattern. Then the squat would repeat again, but it was called squat 2 because in that squat session, the B series would be a squat variation. So they would be squatting twice. Then the next upper body would be a dip session. And then the last lower body would be a deadlift session. So what was cool is for that general population that would come to the group training, because every primary movement in the A series was only trained once every 14 days, it seemed like there was a lot of variation. So it didn't seem boring to them. But in reality, there was a lot of repetition because our A series, we would never change it. It would basically rotate over and over and over and over and over and over across these 2 weeks. The only thing that we would change every 6 weeks would be the assistance and remedial exercises. And this, of course, it's impossible to do true progression in the context of group training. So it was mostly just variation. We were basically just rotating through various stimulus, but with no true progression in mind because it was impossible to do. So, so what happened is me and Alexandra, which was our partner at the time, what we did is we built 2 years worth of programming, which were kind of they were not progressions, but they were very sequential, meaning that, let's say, program one, which was associated to Power Rack one, the first phase, let's say the B series on one of the lower day was lying leg curl. Well, program two, 6 weeks later, when we were changing that power rack, then it would be a standing leg curl. Then it would be a kneeling leg curl. So like we would always have a progression so that that exact same movement pattern does not reappear until a certain period of time.
Yeah.
And then the second power rack, because the lying leg curl was used on power rack one, power rack two, the lying leg curl would be a standing, and power rack three, the lying leg curl would be a kneeling. So everything was smooth and rolling, and we had 2 years worth of training. So what would happen is a client comes in, they jump in wherever we are in time, and then they go through our programs, and then nothing will repeat outside of that A series until 2 years. So there's enough variation to avoid monotony and boredom. And to them, it got to the point like nobody remembers what they did 2 years ago. So let's
Yeah.
say they had a easy bar French press, and the easy bar French press only occurs once in 2 years, and they have it 2 years later. They don't know. So it was just like it always kept things fresh. But the true measure of success was the technical teaching of the primary movement and the variation in load and volume with the primary movement over time. This is where we really, really affected change. And that's the thing. Although one of the workout was a squat workout, if the new client would come in and the squat looked like pure trash, we would not force them into a squat. We would simply regret. Like we have a online course called the movement analysis and progression assessment course. So this is basically the assessment that we do with our one-on-one client. But that's what we kind of did with the group clients. The client would come in, the squat looks like trash. We would simply regress the technical level of the squat to a squat that it could perform safely. So let's say we had to revert down to a heels elevated goblet squat. So be it. For that client, that becomes their squat for that time period. Then eventually we're like, okay, now move on to a Zercher, try a Zercher, see how that feels. Then that's good. Okay, now move on to a front squat, see how that feels. So we would just have a built-in progression that every coach knew that we would just gauge with whatever level or speed of progress the client would be. Some people were fast learners, others were slow learners. Some people might be stuck on goblet squat for 3 months straight, others it was 3 weeks. So it was very individualized in that sense,
Yeah.
but it was still group training because in essence we didn't vary anything truly.
Yeah.
I don't know if
Yeah,
it
I
makes
think from
sense.
there, especially explaining that system, you can see why it works. I love the fact that you mentioned there. Yeah, if you put this in and you've got a 2 year cycle, of course, no one's going to do about that because if it's rotating round, I think sometimes coaches have that sense of they need to change things a lot quicker in a condensed amount of time. Where have you said there over 2 years? Do you think having that plan, that system in place over such a long period of time allows you to have I don't know whether the what the right phrase is for this, but kind of trust or confidence in that system. So when people are coming in, you know that okay, so they can follow this around. You know you've got a bigger time frame for them to develop or regress through, as opposed to having a system or a plan for a shorter period of time and then having to rethink again and add more novelty in or more changes or adapt or try and change things around a little bit more with members, if that makes sense.
Because in my opinion, if you run a group training facility and you don't think long term and you build, let's say, 8 week or 12-week phases, and then you build another one, and then you build another one, and then you're kind of reactive to who the client is, what happens is eventually you lose sight of the bigger picture. You might get influenced by the new trends and and cool trend of the moment, and then you lose sight of the true program, and this affects the development of the clients. But by building 2 years straight, then as a facility coach, you can really focus on what really matters, which is developing the skills on the primary movement. And the big difference is if I'm training someone one on one, of course, my assistant's work and remedial work will be programmed as a byproduct that are specific to the trainee's weaknesses. But now, because so, for example, let's say that the mid trap, the lower trap of client X are really, really weak. Well, I'm not necessarily going to rotate every 3 weeks or every 6 week the mid trap exercise. No, I need to keep a form of that mid trap exercise because he's so weak that the best thing I can do for that client is trying to match that strength as quick as I can so that that limiting factor is not a limiting factor anymore. So that client in a one-on-one scenario might be doing lower traps for 8 week, 12 weeks straight until we reach our standard. But in the group training, because I don't know who shows up at any point in time, I can't do this. So the best I can do is have a logical rotation of stimulus across all motor patterns over time so that at least the people who do have weaknesses somewhere, at least it gets covered, it gets touched on at one point in time. So that's the approach here. So we're focusing on teaching the bigger lever, which is the primary compound lift. So they improve their skills and proficiency and neural
Yeah.
acuity and intermuscular coordination. And then eventually you build intramuscular coordination and on and on. But then the rest, at least as a fault of not being able to individualize, you'll go through every. We even had neck extensor, we had grip work, we had ulnar flexion thrown in once in a while. Like we tried to cover every base for fun sake and to make sure everything was touched on. But it was cool because the client had been training. We were in California for 5 years, and we had clients that trained with us for 5 years. They thought it was the coolest thing because they did stuff that they never had done in their life. They didn't even know it
Yeah.
existed. So just the thrill, oh, for the next 6 weeks on my bench day, the C1 is blah, blah, blah exercise. That's cool. I've never done this. And they were always excited to do it. Like
Yeah.
they didn't always have a huge impact on their performance and development. Yeah, no, but at least it was not a nuisance. And for the people who lacked something there, at least they had something that covered it.
Yeah, definitely. And do you think that's the difference between, from a coach's point of view of being able to refine and develop the system and the program that you've put together as opposed to trying to, just change things or try and outthink or try and add in the new trend or trying to just like change things around and start from scratch again, kind of that difference between refining and kind of scrambling to find something new.
Well, in my opinion, every time you do something that's not part of a bigger system, you're doing a disservice to the client because you're going to make a mistake and you won't even realize it. And because training the training process is such a slow process. It's such a slow grind. You cannot afford to be switching things around all the time because of the flavor of the month and or because you forgot what you programmed before. Because one of the biggest mistake I see with younger students that come to our education is they always build in a phase by phase uh, model.
Yeah.
So they're like, oh, that'd be cool. And then they build the next month. Then they learn something new. They talk to someone. Oh, shit, the next phase, they build something. Here's the next phase. But then you realize that there's a complete dissociation between the two phases. It doesn't build one into the next. So there's no true training effect. It's just a new stimulus for the sake of a new stimulus, but you're not helping the bigger picture of the training concept. And then not only that, but what also happens is I'm a big believer in having, for example, with rowing movements, well, any upper body pulling movement, that it's a hanging pull or a horizontal pull, because the upper back is such a complex structure, there's so many different muscles involved, so many origins and insertion points. I believe that the greater the amount of variation in grip width and hand position, although let's be clear, hand position affects more bicep recruitment than the upper back, but that's fine. But the more variation you have, the better the overall development of your upper back will be in the long run because you're targeting a broader spectrum of motor units. But the problem is if you don't plan for this over a long period of time, most people when they write phase by phase, they forget what they've been doing in the past and they
Yeah.
revert to what they're always used to, which is the medium grip, medium neutral row. Oh yeah, medium neutral row. Yeah, that's good. That's good. And then you go and look back at your training after a year. You're like, holy shit, 87% of the year I did medium grip neutral row. Fuck, I didn't realize it. But then I missed the boat on a lot of variation that could have been beneficial on the overall development of the upper back for that client. And that happened because you didn't plan for it. You were just reactive and you were playing in a face to face perspective based on the flavor of the month and no true structure and goal and system in mind. So I'm a huge believer in system. I mean, I'm 48 years old. I've been living for a decent amount of time, and everybody, and I've trained like really high-end executive in many sphere of business. Anyone that I've ever met that's highly successful, they're successful because they use systems.
Yeah.
So to me, if you want to be a successful strength coach and you're not using something that's systematic in your approach, well, then you cannot predict the future. You cannot predict the outcome of your training. So to me, to have a system is so crucial. Like, but look at it even in our field. Look at Louis Simmons for powerlifting. He had a system. Look at Joe DeFranco with American football. He had a system. Like they all have systems. So that to me, it's so crucial.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought that was a really good point. Yeah, it reinforces to me I'm not going too far wrong because it made me smile there thinking about forgotten what you've done before. You know, to have that plan, have that system, and being able to have that structure. And one of the key things that it boils down to ultimately, if you don't have that in place, you're going to do a disservice to the client, to the member there, which is ultimately, what that system, what that structure is in place. Therefore, to then have that success. Quite a lot of topics, information and tangents in there, Stefan. But really, really enjoyed chatting with you today. The last question that I like to ask for the coaches listening or the clients and members listening. What would be your take home points or words of wisdom that we've spoken about today, Stefan?
I mean, the words of wisdom. So have a system. Like I don't care what system it is, but choose something that speaks to you, that's relevant to your client, and expand on that system and plan for it. Because what I was saying about about coaching or programming on a phase by phase perspective, it's such a disservice. And the perfect example, like one of the biggest, easiest example that I'm sure many will relate to is abdominal training. I see this all the time with student programming. So you write a program, a 1 month phase, and then you saw an ab exercise on social media that looked really, really cool. Let's say that it's a contralateral ab wheel, freaking, I don't know. So ab roll out with one leg up. And then you give that to your client, and the client is struggling because it's really hard. You need to stabilize, you need to brace really, really hard. It's like, oh shit, that's quite challenging. Cool. Then you write your next phase, and then I don't know, you're busy, you need to write 9 programs in 30 minutes, so you're not really overthinking. So you're like, oh shit, I need an ab exercise here. Uh, I'll do a Swiss ball crunch with the low pulley. Okay, blah, blah. Okay. And then the phase after, you lose track of where you are with that client because you have 22 workouts to write. Uh, I'll do a supine crunch on the floor with feet up on a bench. So wait a minute. So now you had the first phase with a brutally hard movement, and then the third phase, you're actually regressing because you're giving him one of the easiest starting point abdominal exercise that exists, which is a supine crunch on the floor with feet supported on a bench. So where's the training effect now here? This would be the training equivalent of doing 6 reps with 100 kilos on day one on squat, and then 3 months later you're doing 6 reps with 50 kilos on squat. Like now you completely trash the concept of progressive overload, but it's not as clear cut in abdominal training because oftentimes there's not an added load to it. It's the complexity of the movement with your body in space. So people keep track of that. But if you were to plan at least 12 weeks in advance for that client, then you could have built-in progressions for ab work so that phase 1 to phase 4, at least there's a logical progression in complexity. Now, and I'm not saying that you write the 12 weeks and then you give the 12 weeks to your client and you don't change it no matter what. No, you need to plan the 12 weeks, but then you need to publish, if you want, every phase, because then you never know what can happen. Is the client stressed and overworked? Then you need to reduce the volume for phase 2. Did the client tweak an elbow? Well, then you need to change certain exercises. So it cannot be, I'll write 12 weeks and copy paste it to the calendar and that's it, I'm good. But you still need to know where you're going. So that to me, like having more of a long-term plan, following a systematic progression and caring about the actual process to improve or increase outcome potential with your client is, in my opinion, outside of actually coaching properly the movements, is the most important thing you can do, at least as a program designer.
Yeah. I think that was a great explanation and example of that. I know, especially for me, like when I first started out, I've probably made that same mistake. I'm sure a lot of coaches listening have made that mistake. So yeah, I thought that was a great example and yeah, words of wisdom to finish on. Again, thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on, Stefan. I thought there was some really useful takeaway points that coaches can think about when they're are looking at their programming. If anyone has any questions about what we've spoken about today, want to reach out to you or see the content that you put out there with yourself and Kilo, where can people find you or reach out to you?
Yeah, so we have our website, which is trainkilo.com. We have our Instagram, which is at Kilo Education, and then my personal page, Stephane.Cazeault on Instagram. You can always reach me out there.
Awesome. Well, again, thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on. Really, really enjoyed that. Thanks a lot to everyone listening, and I will catch you all at the next episode.